Welcome to It Takes a Village. Startups and educators working together to support educational innovation. What you're about to hear is a panel discussion that took place at the ECHO conference in November 2014. During the conversation, you'll hear from educators as they share the specific benefits and challenges of working with startups. Please be aware that you may have some challenges hearing the moderator, but you'll be able to hear the responses by the educators very clearly. Enjoy.
Today, and I am Camille Rutherford from Brock University. I will be facilitating that conversation. I've got a very well-experienced, mighty crew here of panelists that have a variety of experiences in working with startups, and in a minute we'll give each of them a chance to let you know what their experience has been like. We're going to start with Cathy Beach, who's a retired educator, but she's also one of the founders of Ed Camp Peterborough. Cathy, and then just give a little bit of wave. So
I'm the only girl.
There you go. Then moving on to Andrew from the Waterloo Board, and the Waterloo Board's been doing some great things with technology, and Andrew's been a part of that. Then moving on to the Toronto Catholic Board and Denny Choe, who is a 7-8 teacher from the Toronto Catholic Board. Then we have Garth Nichols, who's the Director of Teaching and Learning, and also the founder and key leader for C21 cohort, which is a cohort of independent school educators trying to look at innovative ways of using technology. And finally, we have the guy with the big titles, Dino Miele from the District School Board of Niagara, and he is the CIO. So again, we have a variety of different educators with different titles and hence different experiences, and I think it will really contribute to a rich conversation. So if we can start with Cathy, if you could tell us a little bit about your experience of working with startups.
I've worked with 2 startups, didn't realize I was working with startups. I just like things to work. And when they don't work, I try and figure out what's going on. And if I can't figure out what's going on, I use the contact at the bottom. And I did that with Get It, and I did that with Sesame. And with both startups, I ended up having long conversations saying, you know, as a teacher, this is really useful, and as a teacher, this is not, and I hate instructions that don't work, and I hate not having help. For example, Sesame did not have their help section up there, Sesame HQ. And I said, you know, a teacher can't figure out anything if your help section's not up there. One of the things you asked about was benefits from this side. Well, obviously benefits, I helped get It and Sesame improve, and they were both wonderful to work with. But you know, when you asked that question, I hadn't thought about it with students, but I share everything I'm doing with my students. So I went in and I said, you know, this Get It is not working, and you actually use the contact button at the bottom. Someone usually answers, and kids don't do that. And so I think there's a benefit of them learning that they can contact people, like there's a person behind all of those things, and there's a conversation to be had. I think there was a hidden, I hadn't thought of that.
Great, thank you, Cathy. Andrew, tell us a little bit about your experience working with startups.
So I'm a high school teacher in the Waterloo District School Board at secondary level, but I also work as an educational technology mentor for Velocity, which is a program at the University of Waterloo to help students start their own companies. The bigger names that come there, Kick, the messaging app, the Pebble smartwatch, Atomic Labs, the Mayo, if you haven't seen that yet, it's really cool. So I've worked with some startups in the edtech space, Planboard, which is now going under Chalk.com, some work with Sesame, Charity in Our Republic, Kaizena is coming out of that space, so I had a chance to work with them in that space and kind of fostering that idea of they've got these great ideas, but how does it work in the classroom, what works for teachers, also what's going to work for them from a business standpoint. It's a really interesting dynamic. The idea of, from their standpoint, is like we want people on, but how do we get them on, this idea of financials and how that plays out too.
So Andrew's had the benefit of working with an incubator and working with a variety of different companies. Denny, you want to tell us your experience?
So I met with Ian from Sesame, and he basically fulfilled a need that I didn't know I had, which was amazing, and it totally saved my organization like tenfold. And some of the benefits that I had were just using it itself and just looking at the problems and issues and being able to communicate those directly and have them resolved right away was one of the benefits with the startup, and almost like shaped it so that it was working better for me as opposed to working better for the whole. But I'm sure working better for me, it'll work better for everyone else as well too. Some of the challenges, I guess, because I'm not a computer guy, like I don't know programming or anything, so I'd want there certain things to be changed, but I guess there were certain hoops to jump through, and those are the things that I didn't know about. And for benefiting the students, like we were able to create an online portfolio for all the students, and it wasn't something that was inside my filing cabinet for the rest of the year. It was something that was shared. It was something that the parents could access, and I could access, and the students could access, and it was very beneficial both ways. So.
Garth, you want to tell us about your experience at Bayview Glen?
Sure. Bayview Glen is a great organization, and we're experimenting, bringing a lot of different educational technologies into the school. But I think for this conversation, I run an organization called Cohort 21, which is for the Conference of Independent Schools of Ontario, where we bring educators into a single space 4 times a year. And that 3rd time we spend at Mars, which is an incubator area. And we work with the educational arm. And we give startups that to your point, that incredibly valuable moment of actually having teachers give them feedback. And it's a really great moment where they say, I'd love to beta test with you in my classroom. Have you ever thought of this? Have you ever looked at that? And one of the great moments was working with a startup called Worldviews, and where we said to them, do you understand how important your app is? It's answering an incredible need. So I'd really like that back and forth between them all, and bringing that community of educators together to let them speak that back and forth piece. It's really good.
And Dino, tell us your experience in working with startups with the District School Board of Niagara.
Oh, great. At the District School Board of Niagara, we have startups in the Innovation Hub, and it's a two-way street. It's win-win for the startups and win-win for our educators as well as our students. As you know, for the startups, it's an opportunity for them to share their product with the educators, and they get insight from the educators saying, yes, it's viable, no, it's not viable, so it gives them a little bit of leapfrogging to move the product forward. On the other hand, the startup does provide a very positive effect in the classroom, because the teacher now has access to technology that they may not have been aware of, or apps or applications that they're not aware of. And the student gets to use relevant technology that they're familiar with, but they get to use it in their oral or written skills and the things that they have to do to meet their expectations in the classroom. So it's kind of a really nice synergy of all three sharing with each other, the startup, the teacher, and the student.
You mentioned the Innovation Hub.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit what that is?
Sure. It's a partnership between Brock University and District School Board of Niagara. And what we're trying to do is we are trying to bring in 8 to 10 startups that have K-12 educational products in various areas of expertise or various areas of in the industry. So whether it's applications, whether it's 3D printing or digital media. And what we're doing there is, as Camille calls it, it's a petri dish. It's a place for us to experiment and try in our own lab to have direct access to our students, our consultants, our teachers, and see how we can help improve the startup products, but also bring the right products into the education system that help us with student achievement, engagement, things like that.
So we've gotten a great introduction to people's previous experiences, and they've touched on a little bit of the benefits. So you're all believers. You've seen the benefits. If you were convincing a non-believer, so a teacher within your school system or within your district, within the independent school organizations, if you were going to convince them to take some time, and we know educators' time is incredibly valuable, but to take some of their time to work with startups, what are the types of things that you would highlight to them about the benefits of directly working with those startups? Andrew?
I'll jump in. Easy in a very selfish way, getting it the way you want it is nice. Again, it was kind of mentioned earlier, the startup side, they're usually coming from a business side, as you kind of highlight, and they're looking out there and they're trying to fill a niche, but if they're not coming on the educational space, if they're not a teacher in the classroom, depending on what level they're looking at from a student perspective, if it's not working on that level or the way they need it to, they need to hear that feedback, and they may not be getting it necessarily. I'm always shocked by how many startups in the educational space don't talk to teachers or openly have some teachers on their advisory panel and don't work with them to that standpoint. And as Cathy kind of highlighted, like some people are clicking the contact button at the bottom and sending feedback in, but a lot of people don't. So you get a chance to get things the way you think it should be and the way you want it. And I think the biggest thing for me with ed tech is we know, from a personal perspective, like good pedagogy, we talk about differentiated instruction, we talk about inquiry-based learning, all those buzzwords we hear from like 30 or 40 years ago. The research has been done a long time ago. The problem is it didn't work in the classroom. It wasn't simple. How do you do an inquiry-based project before you had Google? But now with ed tech coming in, they're really kind of solving those answers for us and making it a way that actually works for students, that works for teachers. And so by reaching out to them, you can kind of fill that space again and get it to where you want it to be.
That's a great response. So educators can get the products they want that can meet those challenges. Any other?
Hands up who are classroom teachers here. We have classroom. Yeah, great. What do we want our students to be doing in our class, right? We want them to be taking risks. We want them to experiment. One of the best things that teachers can do is model this. It's this concept of failing. So I think FAIL is an acronym, first attempt in learning. And if you're working with a startup, then there's your opportunity. You can fail together, right? And then you can build yourself up. So it's bringing that mindset and it's bringing that modeling right to the classroom, which I really like. And to your point as well, you're getting a lot out of it too, saying this is what I want and this is what I need. But I think when we're dealing with startups, the number one most important thing is that this has to enhance student learning, right? At the ground level, this is the point. It's not to take a chunk of the money, right? And you have to work with startups to steer them, sometimes to steer them away from that mindset. How is this going to benefit student learning? Where's your research? Where's your best practice? Oh, we're it. Okay, great. Then let's work together, and I'll tell you whether or not it's actually working in the classroom. Yeah.
I was just going to say, like I always teach my students, if you want something, ask for it. And if you can't do that yourself, what are you teaching your students? So it was a nice way to kind of show them, like, listen, this is what I wanted out of this website. I asked for it. Look what happened. I got it done. What was the worst that could happen? They could have said, no, it can't happen. Okay, big deal. We'll move on to the next. And I thought,
it's okay.
For our students to show them, again, modeling, like, it's okay to fail or it's okay to ask, I think it was a huge learning experience for them as well as myself.
I definitely think that's something that people don't always think about. Like, obviously, we are role models for our students, and what we've heard already is that modeling it's okay to fail, but they also learn about the design process, the reiteration. And if we as educators are supposed to be teaching that to our students, shouldn't we be experiencing that ourselves? So I think those are some great benefits I hadn't thought about before that the students can gain from as well. Anyone else want to add to? Go ahead, Kath.
On a really selfish level, any of us who have gone through the learning curve, well, we do every day, on something new, I want someone sitting right here saying, okay, you just did that and you've got a problem. So last night I'm doing my presentation, just making sure everything's working, and Sesame will not let me in. So I don't know if you noticed, I tweeted out to them, okay, are you guys working tonight? Because I've got a presentation tomorrow and the whole thing has crashed. All my students disappeared. No, I say, you're not supposed to tell people that, right? Because Sesame, I think wonderful. But I got help at 9 o'clock at night from 3 of them. 3 separate Sesame guys responded. And any other time I've had trouble, I get response because they know I'm trying to help them in response. So tech help, 24 hours a day, awesome. So, like if I were teaching today in a classroom, I would be able to do what I really wanted to do. You don't want to hear about the tech fail, the epic fail, but anyway.
Just to add on to that too, ed tech companies tend to be quite keen once they have you, and they help you, they nudge you too, right? So that you don't lose track or you don't lose sight of what you're trying to do. Working with Cube for Teachers, for example, they always, oh yeah, I forgot. I was going to do something on that, or I forgot to pass that on to another teacher. And they're there nudging you, or they're on Twitter or something like that. They're really, in terms of ed tech companies, can be very beneficial in that way and help nudging you along in your learning process.
And I think that's a great point, because when you look at these startups, they're very small, and so very often the relationship you have with them can be very personal. So you get that responsiveness very often that you may not get from a larger company. they listen to what it is that we have to say as educators, because they're small and very often they are very excited about improving their product and moving forward as well. For myself, I teach undergrad and graduate students, and so I've tried to create opportunities for my students to interact directly with those startups. Because when you look at the education market the way it is in Ontario right now, there aren't a lot of teaching jobs, and for them, they've really benefited from interacting personally with those startup founders, because it's opened up their eyes to other career opportunities. It's also then, when they've had opportunity to see the pitches that these startups very often do, like, I don't know how you can cover everything about your product, do such a great job in 3 minutes, but it's incredibly effective communication. And I know my students have benefited from that. Have any of your students had an opportunity to directly interact with those startup founders or their early staff people to learn directly from their experiences?
Yeah, I can jump that first. Being lucky and being in Waterloo region, having Velocity there, we've had a lot of great ed tech startups come through there, and having them right in the local area. I really try to focus on the idea of entrepreneurship. StatsCan's talking like the next 15, 20 years, almost 1 in 3 Canadians will have some form of startup in some way. It might be like an online business and second income, but the idea of looking at entrepreneurship as a potential career choice and what that means. So having them come in and talk about maybe their product and like a little feedback from the students there. More importantly, just talking about what does it mean to be a startup? What's that lifestyle like? What's that career choice like? What does that look like for you as a student?
And I think that's a very authentic way when we look at how, not just in Ontario, but across Canada, everyone's making this big push for entrepreneurial education. And we can do something contrived that comes out of a workbook, or we can let them have a personal, authentic interaction. There was an article out of the Harvard Business School last week, and it's not rocket science. The #1 way to become an entrepreneur is to work with an entrepreneur. And so the fact that we can have these people coming into our classrooms, and I think it takes us saying, yeah, I want to see your product, but first, I want you to come in and tell me a little bit about your career path, your education, and why you chose this opportunity. Dino?
Yeah, we do similar things, as you're aware, Camille, with the Innovation Hub. We're lucky enough that it's inside the DSPN Academy, which is a school, grade 5 to 10, and it grows every year to grade 11 and 12. So the students are able to go and see the startups that are in the iHub, and they get to ask questions. One may say, I just want to be able to develop games. I love games. I love games. And then they get a real true story of what it may mean to build a game-based learning product, whether it's for math or any of the other products. The other thing we have is an encore program after school, where the students can go in and learn from the startups, the product itself, and then they ask questions. Well, is that something I could get into if I enjoy this kind of career, or if I enjoy 3D printing, or if I do enjoy more of the digital media with video and that kind of information technology. So there is a really good two-way communication, because the startup gets to engage with the students, but at the same time, students get to see that what's real life about when I go towards my career path.
So to kind of recap what we talked about, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No.
We're like family here.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit jealous because I work for a non-startup. And so I was wondering whether this is a process that we could participate in, even though we're sort of a more established company.
Anyone like to comment?
Or is that just not the intent of this?
No.
No, I would go back to what's already been talked about. I think, and what I mentioned earlier, if working with your company benefits students, if working with your sales reps, working with maybe the people who started the company, bringing them in, I think the same process can happen. I don't think the downside is you're not as nimble as the startups, right? To take in our feedback and say, oh yeah, sure, we'll adjust Blackboard this way, or something along those lines. Like, I think you lose that end of it, but I think on the whole, if it's benefiting student learning, if you're talking about entrepreneurship or business, then yeah.
And we're trying to build teams within a bigger structure
Right.
that are smaller and nimble.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, I think we're borrowing that.
Right. And I like that. What was just said is because you bring You'll bring expert advice and a different perspective for the startups that are there if you come in with your expertise already, and if you're helping to be a guide on the side, or even mentorship is really important for them. So to have someone who's non-startup be able to work along with startups, I think that's fabulous. There's some strengths there.
Or to show why you're changing.
I was going to say that with things changing so much that even some of the established need to get back in touch with what the changes are happening in the classrooms to see how they might need to change. Because just because they created something 4 years ago doesn't mean that it's appropriate now or for the next 4. So yeah, I absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to agree too. More now than ever, I think it's really important for larger companies who've been established for a while to get back to kind of more grassroots a little bit, because especially in the tech industry, above all others, it moves so quickly and you can get left behind. I can name a number of examples in the tech industry in the past 5 or 6 years. If you go back 5 years ago, look where they were, and then look at their market share now, it's decreased exponentially. And I think a lot of that's because they weren't fluid, they weren't moving, and they weren't talking at the grassroots anymore.
Interesting.
I think that creates a great opportunity. And again, it's for us as educators. We can invite these companies in. Here's a great opportunity to compare and contrast a large company. What is it that you do in your company? What's your organizational structure like? And a startup, instead of reading it out of a textbook. So if you look at some of the secondary business classes, the entrepreneur classes, that's what they're studying from their textbook. Here's a great opportunity to learn that firsthand. We just need to ensure that when we're inviting these people, and I'll be honest, it may be a product that my students are not going to get to touch directly, but still it could be a great learning experience. But we have to shape that experience when we invite those people in. Doug?
Yeah, technology is littered with startups that have great ideas and fail, or they've got great ideas and they've been bought up, or your data has been shared with other places and so on. So I guess my question to the panel would be, how do you choose the startup that you want to pair with wisely so that you know they're going to be in there for the long run and that it's going to be worth your time in the classroom and your students' time in the classroom, and you're not going to get the rug pulled out from underneath you somewhere along the line of your project?
I think that's a great segue into how do you choose, but also then segue us and answer the question about what are some of the challenges? What are the things, some of the problems that you may have? Because I think Doug brought up some of these. So go ahead, Andy.
Well, we were working with Understood It, and with my students, we were investing a lot of time. In Core 21, we were investing a lot of time. And then I got an email one day that said, we are no longer here. We've been bought up. Gone. Poof. And so my reaction was, there must be another tool. Introduce Socrative or whatever it is. I'm not in it for a long-term relationship. I'm in it for how is it going to benefit student learning. And if they're going to disappear, let's talk about that. Why would they be bought up? Is that a good thing for them? Is that a bad thing for them? Okay, now what do we do? How nimble are we as learners in this situation? So,
I think at the current time, if it fits a need that you have, I think that's beneficial enough. As long as that need is taken care of, a year, 2 years, 4 years down the road, there's going to be another need, and there's going to be somebody else kind of in the shadows just waiting for you to, waiting for your business that, the other company that you were working with already has, right?
So I think one of the key things, too, is that startups, there's a lot of them, and there has to be a vetting process. And in the vetting process, you have a good advisory group, and you look for key intellectual property that will be of value that you can bring into your startup group of companies, and that's where you start to see whether that value can be retained and not taken out by other companies, and because you're using it within the classroom environment, you're testing it out, and you grow it from there. But again, it has to be vetted, and you have to be sure it aligns with the key initiatives that are requested by the boards, by the school boards, and by the Ministry of Education.
I know for myself, with dealing with startups, I really don't care if they make money. If it's a good learning experience for my students, then I'm happy. But Doug does raise a good question about security, privacy, and who's going to own that data. Has anyone had any issues or problems related to that, or the company ended and your data disappeared?
I've never had to enter data with a startup. So it's all like freemium, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Well, there are exports you need to do sometimes to identify the students that are going to be accessing, whether it's a game-based learning, like a math program, or if you're looking at an assessment type tool. So there are exports that we have to do, but there's a lot of signing of NDA agreements and personal security.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, to come back to your question, for me, especially when you're working at startups, you get to kind of meet the people who are actually at the ground and have a lot of control over it. And the biggest thing for me is actually the people, even more so in the product itself in the beginning. I like very quickly, if it's over the phone or if you have a chance to meet in person, meet the people there. And the question I always ask first is, why are you doing this? And I really put a lot of stock in what their answer is. If they're focused on good pedagogy and like what's good for students and like making improvements in the classroom, that usually wins me over versus for some other instances more financial and other things like that. So I think the people make a big difference when you choose to actually spend some time work with somebody or not. Going back to privacy, I think it's a really big issue now. Even when we talk about GAP for education, there's been a lot of like data mining and are they using it? How is that being used? For asking our students to sign up for something, what are they putting in? What information they're putting in? How is the company using that? You mentioned where it's being stored. Even if it's a Canadian company working in Ontario, they might be using data servers in another country where the privacy law is there. Who has access to that information? There are a lot of questions there that we don't necessarily always ask ourselves that can become very important. It's becoming a bigger and bigger issue in the news right now, and a lot more people are starting to look into it.
I think that is an important area for us as educators to be informed and to actually read the user agreements. Raise your hand if you've read all your user agreements for all the... My hand's going down. But that as well could be a really good learning experience for our students to make them actually read the user agreement and decide, do we want to use this? What is going to happen with our information that is going in there? Are they selling any of our information? Are we the product? We are now their guinea pigs. What do we get out of it? So I think those are all important things that, to make a really rich learning experience, that we could address those as part of that learning experience with our students. But again, I think it's first to highlight that educators definitely need to be informed. You can't just say, oh, I like this, come on into my classroom. That we need to be informed about what the nature of that relationship, how will they be using our data, how will our students interact with them, and things like that. But that, as well as the same thing, that we're role models and we're modeling the kind of things that they should be thinking about. That should be the same thing that when you invite a startup and even a major company into your classroom, for your students to think very critically about that. But that as well could be a great life skill as well. So we only have about 5 minutes left. What are some strategies or ideas, and we'll open up to the audience as well. What are some strategies or things to do to ensure that the relationships that we have with these startups are mutually benefiting? We know what they get out of it. They get our educational insight. They get that quick, ready product feedback that they can go and develop and then make $1 billion off of. How do we ensure that there's a balance between how it benefits us and our students and it benefits the startups as well?
He says free shares.
Free shares in the company.
Free shares.
I have to say that I don't know if the K-12 market is $1 billion for a startup, but it can be. But it's. I think what's beneficial is knowing that you're going to be affecting. Let the startup know they're going to be affecting change in the classroom. That's really important in the way that things are either being taught or the way a collaborative environment or an open environment works. And knowing that that's the kind of environment that we need for our kids to learn in, they could create a product that engages them and allows for that type of learning.
I'm just curious to know how we get involved with startups. This is because in our school we might have a need for something, we don't find a product out there, so we communicate with
I think it is part of it, and then what we kind of have our panel here, that very often once you start working with one startup, it kind of opens up your perspective and you start seeing these other ones. So you start ending up kind of being on the startup circuit. And once one finds out that, oh, I can go to Bayview Glen and they'll work with us, you start seeing others that are knocking at the door as well. But when you look up especially here in Southern Ontario, so as Andrew mentioned, there's the Velocity Garage at the University of Waterloo. There's Mars, it's kind of aligned with the University of Toronto, which is downtown Toronto. There's also the Ryerson DMZ, Digital and Media Zone, that's there. Then there's Brock and DSBN's very own Innovation Hub. So they're out there, and that's where they're clustered, and there's groups of them. As well, then, in different types of events and opportunities I think they just had at Mars an EduPack. It was a great opportunity for educators to go in and say, hey, this is what my need is. Is there a solution available? As well, and there's a number of startups that have started hitting the EdCamp circuit because that's a great opportunity to interact with educators and then to see. And then very often, as soon as you get your hands on one, it could be a great opportunity to interact with others or as well. But I do know myself or Dino would love to take your contact information.
Yeah, and you're in.
And there you go.
Congratulations.
There's a key thing to understand is that we've learned, I didn't know, there's two types of startups, if you want to call it that, very simplified. There's the social startup that isn't there to make money, and then there's the entrepreneurial one, and we have both.
Just to answer your question, I think it's really important that educational technology startups work closely with the person at the school. So my role at Bayview Glen, my title is I'm the Director of Teaching and Learning. You find, like as an ed tech company, you find who that is in the school because proper placement of these startups is really important. Because you can have a really keen teacher who's like, whoo, I want to work with you, and the matching isn't proper. Kids are too young, content isn't appropriate or what have you. So you can look into schools and try and find that because the placement of these ed tech companies are really important. And the purpose, right? Like I'm a big fan of the SAMR model, applying it to everything. So what's the purpose of this, right, in your school, first and foremost? For example, if you wanted to bring your company in, you'd probably bring it into a business course. Whereas if you wanted to work with an ed tech company, you'd probably bring an entrepreneurship course. So just that little subtle change could make the content and the discussion that much more valuable. So the placement of them in grade level and in discipline is really important.
And I think what Cathy said as well, she found something she kind of liked and then hit the contact button to say, hey, this is okay and I kind of like it, but here's some feedback to make it better. And very often they'll respond to that, and you respond to them and give them the feedback, the odds are they'll keep coming back to you. And I'll be honest, that's how I got some of the people here today. Andrew?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. Just reach out. Again, we're in different spaces here, like you might be in a spot where some people are coming to us now, but if that's not in the role, if you're not in the right space for that, just like if you find something you like and it's not quite where you want it to be, if it's missing something, hit the contact button, fire them off a message. Kaizen, actually, the way I got, they're actually in Velocity, but the way I got set up with them was I went to the first Google Apps Summit, the Ontario Summit for Google Apps in Waterloo, and everyone was talking how much they would love to be able to leave voice comments within Google Docs, and like no one there knew. Like, everyone on the Gap Summit team had no idea how to do it. So I'm like, that sounds really cool. Actually, I would love to do that. I was doing Google searches and found like some bizarre web page on like page 14 of Google, and I reached out to him and it's like just fired him a quick email. And we started talking, and I was talking about how fantastic I wanted. People are looking for this, and his name's Max Brody, started, and we chat all the time now, back and forth. I presented on him a little bit today, and I fired him an email last night because I had a little bug issue. It was like, hey, I want to show this tomorrow. Let's a little tweak here, and it was fixed like the next hour. So just fire them an email. They usually want to respond back, especially in the startup space.
I just want to give an example based on Kazana. I was at ISTE 2 years ago, and Max happened to be there as well, and he had a T-shirt that said "Voice Comments for Google Docs." And I said, oh, do you work for the company that does that? He goes, no, I made it. And then brought him to a reception, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, that's the guy that made voice comments for Google. And he was like the hit of the party. And he didn't realize that educators would be that excited about that. And it just, for him, it was great because he happened to have his T-shirt that said exactly what he did, and then people just started hounding him. So they're there and they're amongst us. I'll tell you this, they're in the room right now too. So if there are startups that you want to interact with, and there are some that are here at the conference as well. Dino, you want to?
I just one challenge I would like to say, because it is very positive to have startups. It's really great to see all this young talent that we have in Canada. Sometimes our K-12 system is an issue where there isn't the acceptance level to bring in something into the classroom so that they can try it to change the way the teaching method is going on. So that's a challenge that we try to work with at the senior team level to get that acceptance for making that change. So that's when some startups can die. Some really good products have gone to the wayside and shelved because there wasn't not enough time to use it in the classroom, to test it out, things like that.
And so I do think there are some challenges if you go to your principal, system leader, or whatever, and say, hey, I would like this app to be on our computers or on our iPads because I'd like to test it out. And they say, oh, no, that's not board approved.
Exactly.
You may get pushback. But if you go to them and you say, I would like to invite these guest speakers to talk about their educational path, entrepreneurship, the design process, and have my students provide feedback so they can work on their communication skills. It's going to be very difficult for whether a principal or a system leader to say, oh, no, you can't support student learning in really innovative ways, and not. So again, it's for us to shape that experience in the same way that we shape what we get out of those startups. It's not just, oh, I want to use your product. I think it really is about building relationships with those companies so we can, as we said here, so we can get the products that we want, so we can get that timely feedback, so that we know that we're building something that's going to be good for students, and then the bottom line is that we're going to support student learning. So I think those are all great things to think about when you're working with startups, if you're considering that, and to make sure you maximize that relationship. We are exactly on time, and I think I hear the wine calling. Thank you very much for everyone for coming out today. Thank you.
Thanks.